Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. I opened the shop at 7:45 in the morning because I needed the extra 15 minutes. The parking lot was busier than any weekday should be. Engines idled in a loose line along the curb. People watched the door without talking. I keyed the alarm, swung the door wide, and took a breath that smelled like gun oil and last night's rain blowing in from the fields. Lights on, counter drawer checked, cameras up on the office monitor, 12 indoor lanes ready, paper targets stacked, pastas and tape in a plastic bin under the counter. On the wall, the handguns looked thin. 9mm already scraped down to the last 2 rows. 223 stacked behind the counter in cartons with plain labels. 12-gauge buckshot 3 shelves wide. I pulled my notepad and wrote the date and the starting counts because I have to write things down, or the day eats the details. My name is Mason Rourke. I am 43. I own the range and the store. I worked as a seasonal ranger in the Panhandle in my 20s, then guided hunts when the parks closed up each winter. I took range jobs to pay for ammo and ended up teaching every week. 10 years ago, I bought this place from a retired Marine and his wife. I paid a fair price, took their old notebooks, and kept most of their rules. I do the paperwork, I keep the doors open, and when classes stack up I still teach, but the store is where I live most days. I have one assistant in the shop, Denny, 28, good with customers, and careful with numbers. I have one other instructor, Raul, who handles most of the law enforcement and private lessons. I trust both of them. I do not hand out trust for free. I keep the vault stocked, and the delivery schedules quiet because nothing gets a place robbed faster than bragging. The bell on the door chimed at 7:58. First in line was a man in a work shirt who said he drove an hour. He wanted a simple 9mm pistol and 2 spare magazines. He kept looking back at the door like he expected someone to reach in and pull him away. I ran the form, checked the boxes, and kept my voice even. I showed him how the slide lock felt under thumb pressure and how the sights should sit on a chest-sized target at 10 yards. He listened. He paid in cash. He left fast. At 8:20, Raul called. His voice sounded thin. He said, "Mus, I am not feeling right. Fever and a headache. I think I caught that flu everyone is arguing about." "Stay home," I said. "Do not come in. Drink water. Take the day. Take 2 days. I can move your classes." "Are you sure? I hate to bail. The department booked lanes for noon." "I will call the sergeant. No one wants a sick instructor near an open lane. Text me if you need anything. I can leave a bag at your porch." He exhaled and said, "I am sorry, man." "Do not be sorry. Be smart. Rest," I said, and hung up. I wrote Raul sick on the notepad and circled it. By 9:10, the line reached the awning. Denny showed up right then, saw the crowd, and jogged inside with a nod. He washed his hands at the back sink and came up front with a stack of target packs and a polite smile that could calm a room. We got into a rhythm. He took the questions. I did the forms. Same 4 questions over and over. Do we have anything left? What caliber is best? How many boxes can I buy? Do you rent rifles? At 9:40, a regular named Hakeem leaned on the counter and said, "You hear about City General? Family group thread says the ER is locked down. People fighting nurses. Cops moving people out." I said, "I have not heard details." He pointed at my 9mm shelf. "Then I will take that pump 12-gauge and 2 boxes of buck. My wife is already on me about it." I rang him up. He signed the form. He looked back at the door twice before leaving. At 10:15, the suburban police officer called. He sounded worn out. "Rourke, we were set for noon. We are swamped. We will not make it." "Understood," I said. "I already have Raul home sick. You get some rest if you can." He gave a short laugh that did not have humor in it. "I have not slept for 2 days. We are running calls non-stop. People are clogging the lobby. Dispatch is drowning. Tell Raul to stay home and lock his door. We will call when the city stops spinning." "Anything you need from me?" I asked. "Not yet. Keep an ear on the scanner, and if you see groups gathering in the lot, call it in, he said, and ended the call. I poured coffee into a paper cup and set it on the counter for Denny. He took 2 gulps and did not blink. We sold through the last of the display 9mm by lunch. I did not touch the back vault. The back vault is not for rushes. The back vault is for keeping the doors ours. At 12:20, a man in a paramedic top stood at the counter, hands shaking just a little. He asked me for a simple .45 pistol. He said he had seen a man who would not calm down no matter what they gave him. He said the man kept standing back up after being dropped with a taser. He swallowed and stopped talking. I slid him the form and did not ask for more. He left with the pistol and 2 magazines. His uniform shirt was stained at the collar from sweat. At 2 o'clock, an older customer I know from Sporting Clays walked in slow. He looked at the empty spaces on the wall and said, "This feels strange." "It is," I said. "You still got birdshot?" he asked. "A little," I said. I set 1 box on the counter. He picked it up and said, "I am not even sure what I would use this for if the worst parts of the news are true." "Routine keeps the mind level," I said. He nodded, paid, and told me to lock up early. I was supposed to end the day with private lessons on lanes 1 through 3. Half the students did not show. The ones who came looked pale. I ran the 2 who showed through basic safety, checked grip and stance, and then cut it short. I told them to go home, check on family, and avoid crowds. Each one thanked me too many times. I cleaned the lanes, oiled 2 squeaky carriers, and stood in the hallway listening to the building breathe. The HVAC hummed. The lobby refrigerator clicked on and off. The place knows my steps from 10 years of the same routine. I keep it simple because simple is how you sleep at all. After closing, I pulled my own rifle out of the locker, a plain .223 carbine I trust, and ran 2 magazines at 25 yards to confirm the 0. Sight picture steady, press straight back, reset, press again. I logged the shots. I cleaned the rifle light and put it back in the rack. I rolled the shutter down to ankle height, killed the lobby lights, and left the office lamp on low. I live alone in a small house 12 minutes from the range. I am divorced, no kids. My ex-wife moved to New Mexico after we split. We parted clean and still text holidays. I do not sleep well at the house. The bedroom feels like a room someone else planned. Most nights I end up on the couch in the living room because the TV stand makes more sense than the bed frame. I drove home, checked the mailbox, dropped the keys in the same bowl I always use, and stared at the couch. I stood there for a full minute, and then turned around, locked the door, and drove back to the range with a bag of clothes in the passenger seat. I do not force sleep in a house that does not want me. Day 2 started with calls. Raoul texted a thermometer picture and a curse. I told him to drink water, sleep, and keep the door locked. Denny beat me to the shop by 5 minutes and opened the shutters halfway to talk to customers without inviting anyone inside. He had a stack of forms ready and a coffee that looked too dark to drink. The line outside had doubled. People were tense but quiet. News anchors on the shop TV moved their mouths too fast. I muted it. A woman in a suit asked for a .223 carbine and a red dot. I mounted the optic, showed her how to confirm 0 at 25 and again at 100, and drew a simple sight picture on a sticky note so she could remember under stress. Her hands were steady. She thanked me and left with her jaw set like a person heading into a storm she already accepted. Around lunch, I realized I had eaten nothing today. Denny slid a granola bar across the counter and said, "Boss, eat." I said, "You too." He tore his in half, chewed like he did not taste it, and said, "My mom wants me to drive to Temple tonight, says the city is not safe." "Listen to your mom," I said. "I will finish the shift," he said. "We will talk tomorrow morning," I said. I did not press. Pressing makes people dig in when they should move. That afternoon, a man in a hoodie tried to buy every box of 9mm we had left on the floor. I told him there was a cap per person. He started a speech about rights and stores gouging. I did not bite. I said, "Cap stands." He muttered something under his breath, pushed out through the door hard enough to pop the weather strip, and stalked to his car. The security film held when the door flexed. I wrote down the time and a short note about his plate just in case. I called an old army acquaintance named Grady who runs a salvage warehouse out near a small airstrip. He handles surplus food, fuel drums, and odd lots from closed commissaries. We have traded on and off for years, always legal, always quiet. He picked up on the second ring. He said, "Rourke, you calling means things are moving. I need dry rations, water, and a fuel check. I will pay in cash," I said. "Come at first light tomorrow. I have a pallet of meal pouches, still sealed, and an odd skid of canned fruit nobody wants. I can do you 2 drums of diesel if you hold them," he said. "Any reason I should not drive out?" I asked. He paused. "Hospitals are getting hammered. I heard 2 small clinics closed their doors. Word from a guard buddy is, there are teams moving people away from certain buildings without calling it what it is. Take side roads. Do not stop for anything cute." "Copy," I said. "I owe you lunch after this mess." "You owe me a quiet month with no news. See you at dawn," he said. I closed the shop at 5 o'clock because I had private lessons at 6 o'clock. Half the students no-showed again. The 2 who came were a couple that bickered about stance until I put them on separate lanes. I kept the training simple and structured. Safety brief, slow strings at 7 yards, reload practice at the bench. No bravado, no movie drills, just fundamentals a person can repeat without an instructor breathing down his neck. After they left, I ran my own dry fire in the classroom with a clearing barrel, then a short rifle set to confirm my 0 one more time. I cleaned the guns and wrote the counts in the pad. I slept at the range again. I rolled the office cot next to the camera rack, set a flashlight face down so the first click would not bounce off the ceiling, and turned the radio on low. The room hummed in a way I know too well, steady and flat, like a machine that wants to work as long as I feed it fuel and leave it alone. Day 3 felt like the start of a weather front that no one had named. The lot filled early. We sold the last of the display handguns by noon. The phone rang non-stop. A teacher I know asked if she should buy a rifle now, or wait. I told her not to make decisions scared. If she wanted a tool, buy a tool, then train with it. She thanked me for talking to her like a person, and not a sale. I found an extra cleaning kit in a drawer, and set it aside with her name on it in case she came in tomorrow. I kept the indoor lanes open for walk-ins who wanted an hour to test new purchases. People shot slow and left in a hurry. Nobody stood around swapping stories. News anchors looked tired and spoke in circles. A rumor thread in a local forum said the downtown hospital lost power twice in 1 hour, and that something happened in the psych ward. That thread got deleted while I was reading it. I clicked refresh and got a blank page. I closed the laptop and went back to the counter because I do not chase ghosts in a browser when a line of live faces needs answers now. At 4:30, Raoul texted that his fever had dropped a little. I told him to stay put and keep the door locked. He sent me a thumb up and nothing else. On day 4, I told Denny to take time off and go see his family. I waited until we opened and cleared the first rush, then said it straight. "Denny, you need to go. Today. The illness is not a headline anymore," I said. He blinked twice and said, "I can cover the rush and drive after dark." "No," I said. "I can handle today. Go pack food and water. Keep the tank half full between stops. Call me when you get there." He looked at the shelves and then at me. "Boss, can I rent a pistol for the road? I will sign whatever you want." I went to the vault, pulled a plain 9mm from the rental rack, 2 magazines, and a small soft case. I set them on the counter with a box of ammunition and a cleaning rag. I said, "You are not renting it. This is for your good work. Keep it. Clean it. Learn it." His mouth opened and closed once. "Mason, I cannot just take it." "You can and you will. You earned it," I said. I wrote the serial in my book under gift and signed my name. He put his hand out like he wanted to hug me and changed it to a handshake. "I will come back when it settles." "You take care of your mum first," I said. He nodded, tucked the case deep in his backpack, and left with his jaw clenched. I watched him on the camera until he cleared the lot. I closed the store at 3 o'clock because I still had lessons on the schedule. I posted, "Closed early for range maintenance," on the door and slid the shutter down enough to send a message without looking scared. The evening students again came in thin. One man tried to crack jokes, then stopped when none landed. I ran him through deliberate shooting at 10 yards and kept it friendly but strict. After he left, I stepped into lane 3 alone, sent a target to 25 yards, and put a few rounds on paper to confirm my zero again. It felt less like practice and more like maintenance on my own head. After dark, I called Grady and confirmed a dawn pickup. He said, "Make 2 runs if you can. Fuel drums do not like to wait." I replied that I would do one, and then decide if the roads look safe enough for a second. He said that was the right answer, and to bring more cash than I think, because people were suddenly in love with paper. Day 5 started at 6 o'clock with a quick sweep of the lot and a camera check. I locked the shutter, left the maintenance sign up, and drove the truck on side streets to the airstrip. The traffic lights still worked, though the timing felt out of step. I passed a line of cars outside a pharmacy with people standing apart from each. No one yelled. No one smiled. Grady had a forklift parked next to 2 blue diesel drums and a pallet of meal pouches still banded. He waved once and got to work. He said, "Pay me and go. You do not want to linger. Folks are watching gates." I counted out the cash. "Heard anything I should know?" He said, "What I hear is messy. One of my guard buddies says do not go near the main downtown hospital. If someone gets weird, it is not a bad trip. Load up, keep to the feeder roads, and if someone waves you down with a story that sounds too neat, keep rolling." "Appreciate it," I said. He stood a second like he wanted to say one more thing, then clapped the drum with his palm. "Go," he said. I got back with the first load at 8:10. I backed the truck up to the side door, rolled the drums into the generator cage, and ratchet strapped them against the frame. I cut the pallet bands, stacked boxes in the classroom, and logged counts. I staged spices, oil, salt, and coffee from a grocery run I crammed in on the way back. I do not skip coffee if I can help it. Morale matters. I added tea bags, some cheap ground pepper, and 2 bottles of cheap whiskey I do not plan to drink unless a day goes long in a way that does not excuse bad decisions. By noon, I could have done a second run. I did not. I watched the camera at the rear gate and saw 2 cars creep by slow, then speed up when they saw the fence. I ate a bowl of rice with canned chicken at the classroom table and made a list of hardware to move from the shed to the doors. I brought in 2x4s, cut crossbars for the side and rear doors, and staged them on saddles I anchored with lag screws. I put a pry bar and a sledge near each door with red tape on the handles so my hand could find them fast. I drilled pilot holes in the plywood sheets and marked them with a black marker so I could hang them in a hurry without guessing. That evening, I did a short low-light walk with a handheld flashlight in the darkened range. I kept the light off and then used it in short bursts, moving between positions and taking mental notes on blind spots. The lanes are soundproofed and can trick a person into forgetting the rest of the building. I stopped at each fire extinguisher and each trauma kit and memorized the reach from a kneel. I went back to the office and wrote a list that looked like a map. Extinguisher, trauma, ammo, door, exit. Day 6 brought the first strange thing I saw up close. It was a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was in the lobby checking the adhesive on the door weather strip when a man bumped the chain link near the pallet curve. He pressed both hands to the steel and slid them down. He wore a torn jacket with one sleeve dark like it had been wet and then dried without washing. He lifted his head and stared through the fence like he was looking past it. I stepped back into the shadow behind the front display and watched without moving. His motions were wrong. He walked forward without noticing the pallet stack, and then corrected too late. Like his eyes worked, but the signals were lagging. He did not speak. He made a sound like a man clearing a dry throat through clenched teeth. He hit the steel again and again, not hard, just steady. I did not shoot. I did not open the door. I let him wear himself out. After 5 minutes, he drifted along the fence, turned toward the creek, and moved out of view. I wrote the time and a short description in the log. I did not write a label for him. I was not ready to use those words. I called Raoul to check on him. He sounded better but still weak. He said, "Do not let anyone in, even if he is bleeding." "I know," I said. "You have water and food?" "Enough," he said. "A neighbor pounded on my door last night and asked to sleep on my couch. I said no." He cursed and left. I watched him on the peephole for 20 minutes. He leaned his head on my door and breathed like a bad engine. Then he walked away. "Call if you need me to drop a bag on the porch," I said. "Save it for someone who has no one," he said, and hung up. For the rest of day 6, I moved through small tasks and checked the fence every hour. I shot nothing. I used no power tools after 5 o'clock. Noise draws problems. I boiled water for tea and sat in the classroom with the door open to let the steam wander out. It is a simple trick to keep the rooms from smelling like someone lives here. I ate a packet meal from Grady's pallet and 2 crackers, then washed the spoon and put it back in the same drawer it came from. I need tiny routines to stay straight. Day 7 had a thin line at opening. People looked tired and quiet. I posted a sign that said ammunition limit per person. A man tried to argue. I did not argue back. A woman in scrubs came in and asked for a simple 9mm pistol and a cleaning kit. She kept her words short. I showed her how to field strip, how to clean, how to lube, and how to store it locked with a cable through the action if a kid was in the house. She said there was no kid. She tucked the cleaning rag in her scrub pocket like it was a handkerchief and left. I spent the afternoon anchoring a steel plate behind the side door. I put an angled plate behind the counter that would catch anything dumb, then staged a shooting bench at a 45-degree angle to the main aisle with a view of the front. I marked the floor with tape so I could find that angle again in the dark. I changed batteries in every flashlight and wrote the dates on little strips of tape. I ran the generator for an hour, checked the oil, and wrote the runtime in the pad. At 6:10, a friend from the volunteer fire department called and said, "We are running calls where people are not acting right. If you hear sirens, stick to the back room until they pass. We have rolled past your place twice today and the lot looks fine." "You be careful," I said. He laughed once without humor. "I will try. Half the crew is out sick. We are using retired guys to drive." "Call if you need water," I said. "Call if you need a door forced," he said, and we ended there. Day 8 changed the shape of the day. It happened at 9:40 in the morning. The sun was high and there were 3 cars in the lot. A man hammered the shutter with both hands. I walked to the door and raised a hand, signaling him to step back. He turned his head a little too far and stared at me through the glass. His skin had a flat look, like someone had drained the color without taking the heat. He clacked his teeth once. I could hear it through the small gaps around the frame. I raised my voice through the shutter. Back up now." He did not move. He hit the shutter again. I went to the side door, slung my rifle, and walked out behind the curve of pallets with the carbine low and ready. I kept the truck between us. I came around the bumper slow and said, "Stop, I am not opening the door. Step back." He took 2 steps at me with a sudden jerk that did not match the rest of his movement. I used the rifle butt to push him in the chest and shove him back off balance. He fell against the shutter, bounced off, and came again. I took 2 steps back, shouldered the rifle and said, "Stop right there." He reached for me. I put a round in his chest. It knocked him down but not out. He made a breathy growl, rolled to his hands and knees, and stood up like nothing in the middle mattered. I fired again at the chest. He fell and got up slower. I did not wait for a third stand. I took a headshot, simple sight picture, straight press. He dropped and did not try again. I stood there with the rifle at low ready and watched for a full minute. No one else moved. No noises except a garbage truck 2 blocks away. I stepped around to the side door, pulled a hooked pole I keep for downed targets, and dragged his body to the edge of the lot near the ditch. I did not touch him with my hands. I used a rag to open the gate, pulled the body through, and left him on the slope where the creek runs when it rains. I went back inside and scrubbed the pole with bleach water and let it dry against the wall. I wrote down what I had done without using big words. Chest shots did not stop him. Headshot did. After that, I hung a new sign in the window. Closed. Everything sold out. That was not true. The floor looked empty, but the vault still held what I did not put up front. The sign was for anyone who needed an excuse to move on. I rolled all shutters down, slid the crossbars into place, and clicked each lock. I moved the shooting bench into its taped position, sat on the stool, and let my breathing slow without counting it. The phone was still alive. News alerts rattled the screen, but half of them loaded slow, and the videos buffered forever. I called the suburban sergeant. He answered on the second ring, and sounded worse. He said, "I am still up. We are drowning. If you shoot, do not call it in, unless you have to. We cannot spare units." I said, "Understood. I just had a man try the shutter." He did not respond to voice. I had to handle it. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "If the head fixes it, do not waste the other rounds," he said. "I copy," I said. "Stay locked," he said, and hung up. I called Denny. He answered on speaker while driving. He said he was halfway to Temple and traffic was slow but moving. I told him to fuel up whenever the tank hit half and to avoid stopping near freeway exits with people standing around. He said his mum was making a room for him like he was 15 again. He laughed once and then went quiet. He said, "Thank you again for the pistol." I told him to learn it and respect it. He said he would. Around 3 o'clock, a friend from a local hunting club texted a link to a forum thread. The title said, "Patients do not stay down." The comment chain was a mess of jokes, panic, and 1 or 2 posts that felt like witnesses. Then the thread blinked out and showed an error screen. I set the phone face down. I do not chase moving targets I cannot touch. At 5:30, I made a pot of coffee and watched the cameras. A woman stood on the far side of the fence with a bag in one hand and a kid's backpack on her shoulders. She stared at the sign and then at the shutter. I walked to the gate, kept the chain on, and said, "I cannot open the door." She said, "Please, I just need a safe place to sit for an hour. My car died." I said, "I am sorry. I have to keep this locked. There is a creek trail 2 blocks east with shade and a water spigot at the trailhead. Take this and move on." I passed a case of water, 2 cans, and a small printed sheet with basic steps for staying out of trouble. Avoid crowds, keep moving, stay away from the downtown hospital, use side streets, keep fuel above half. She looked like she wanted to argue. She did not. She took the case and walked toward the creek without looking back. I watched until she turned behind the trees. Day 9. I worked quietly. I bolted a plate inside the rear door, added a second chain across the vehicle gate, and moved a junk car into a tighter curve so a tow strap would drag sideways instead of straight. I taped a laminated map inside the office with 3 routes out of the city marked in green and 3 places to avoid marked in red. I do not plan to leave, but planning is not the same thing as quitting. I ran dry fire in the classroom, then patterned 3 buckshot rounds on paper at 15 yards, marked the holes, and taped the paper to the wall behind my desk so my brain would hold the pattern instead of guess in a bad moment. I rotated water cases, moving the oldest forward. I wrote dates on everything in thick marker. In the afternoon, Raoul called. He sounded tired but clear. He said, "A neighbor tried my door again and asked to borrow my car. I told him no." He started crying. Real crying, not fake. I still said no. "You did the right thing," I said. He said, "I hate this." "I know," I said. "Stay put. Drink water. I will drop food if you need it." "I have enough," he said. "Keep it for you." At 7 o'clock, I shut down the shop side lights and left only the office lamp. I decided to check how the generator works to make sure everything is okay in case of power outages. I ran the generator for an hour to top off devices and the camera system batteries. I checked the oil and wrote the number down. I ate rice and tuna at the classroom table and kept the window open to let the smell out. I put my boots by the cot and rested with the belt hung over the chair so my hand could grab it without thinking. Day 10, the phones began to die. Messages queued and failed. Calls went to nowhere. I could still load a news site if I waited long enough, but half the pictures were grey boxes. A statewide alert said to stay home and avoid hospitals unless it was life or death. The line outside the pharmacy 2 blocks over stretched around the corner and then broke as people drifted away empty-handed. A customer who used to argue with me about every optic came to the gate at 10:30 and shouted that he needed ammunition. I stood inside the gate and said, "We are closed." He yelled, "I know you have stock, do not be stingy." I said, "I have limits for a reason. Come back next week if the city is calmer." He tried to push the gate and found the second chain. He swore at me and walked away. I watched him get into a car with 2 other men. I wrote the plate number and a short note about his temper in the pad. Around noon, I called the sergeant again. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried the non-emergency line and sat through silence. I turned on the radio and spun the dial until a clipped voice said, "Overflow and redirect and units hold." The words bounced and then cut to static. I wrote them down with the time. I walked the fence at 2 o'clock with a 12 gauge loaded with slugs and a tow strap over my shoulder. I checked each tie. I tightened 3. I looked for drag marks under the pallets. Nothing fresh. I sprayed bleach on the handles and left it to dry. I kept my steps quiet. I do not like announcing myself to empty space. At 4:15, I called Denny. His phone went straight to dead tone. I sent a short text that said, "Check in when you can." The message hung there with a single grey mark. I set the phone face down on the desk and stared at the office wall for a full minute because the wall does not spin stories. The wall just holds paint and light. That night, I wrote a list for the next week. Move more water into the classroom. Cut plywood for the front glass. Add a second noise line in the funnel with aluminum cans on paracord. Finish labeling the food buckets with dates. Confirm rifle 0 again after the rooftop patch I plan to do. Keep the generator on a strict schedule. 2 hours tonight, then rest it until the day after tomorrow. I clicked the camera views one by one. Front lot empty. Rear gate quiet. Side alley still. Lanes dark and clean. I turned off the office lamp and lay on the cot. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the building. I am alone by choice. I stay alone because I want to keep that choice. My rules are simple. Help through gaps. No one comes inside. Noise brings trouble. Write it down. If it is not staged, it does not exist. Day 11 started at 6:20 in the morning with a full systems check before the sun cleared the roofline. I kept the interior lights off and used a small flashlight directed at the floor. I confirmed the shutter locks, slid each crossbar out and back in to feel for rough spots, and checked the tape marks on the floor for the shooting bench position so I could set it without thinking. I moved to the classroom and updated the water rotation, pulling 2 older cases to the front and logging the date. I boiled water on the camp stove for coffee, opened a small tin of condensed milk I had saved, and measured a spoon into the cup because rationing starts with small things. I ate oats with peanut butter and wrote 3 lines in the pad. Generator runtime target 90 minutes tonight. Outdoor plate rack into shed. Add noise line at vehicle gate. I strapped on the compact 9mm, slung the 223 carbine, and stepped to the side door. The air outside carried a faint sour odor that did not belong to the fields or the creek. The road in front of the range stayed quiet. I kept the chain on the side door and scanned the fence line and the pallet funnel I had built at the vehicle gate. No movement. I unlocked, slipped through, and immediately relocked the door from the inside with the extra bar. I moved the plate rack from the outdoor berm into the maintenance shed and bolted the shed door from the inside, then exited through the small hatch I had added behind a stack of pallets. Details matter. The rack can become cover if pulled into the shop at the worst time. Back inside, I ran dry fire in the classroom for 15 minutes with the 9mm into the clearing barrel. I focused on smooth presses and clean resets. No speed, no drama. I then moved to lane 2 and ran a quiet check of the carrier rails with no rounds. The squeak I heard on day 5 did not return. I logged the maintenance result and wiped the lane glass. The routine calmed the mind without dulling it. I then set up the noise line at the vehicle gate using clean aluminum cans, tied on a run of paracord threaded behind the pallets. I tested the tension and confirmed that any tug on the gate or the car curve would knock at least 2 cans together. A light noise at the wrong time is warning enough. At 10:10, a text from Raoul came through after a long delay. He said the fever had broken overnight and he was weak but stable. I sent back a short reply telling him to stay locked and not open the door for anyone. The message showed a single grey mark for 5 minutes and then finally ticked to delivered. I tried calling to friend from the police, straight to voicemail. I left a 20-second message stating that I had reinforced the gate, that I had handled one hostile at the shutter 2 days prior, and that I would not be calling unless a situation involved fire or injury outside my fence. I do not ask for help I know cannot arrive. I kept the shutters down, and the sign out front that said closed and sold out. By noon, 2 separate cars slowed at the curb, read the sign, and drove on. I used the quiet to pull 2 more steel plates from storage and set them behind the counter on simple brackets I had drilled weeks ago for this purpose. I moved the trauma kit to the lower left of the counter, the fire extinguisher to the right, and checked both for dates and pressure. Everything within reach and in the same position every day. I ate rice with a pouch of tuna and drank 2 cups of water. I keep 2 gallons per day as the rule and write the remaining estimate on a sticky note so the numbers do not drift. At 2:30 I stood in the side hallway and listened. The city noise was thinning, not gone but thinner than any normal weekday. Fewer trucks, fewer horns, less idle chatter, no music from car windows. I walked the interior perimeter again and checked the screws I had set into the side door plates. I marked 2 that felt loose and tightened them with a hand driver until the head seated clean. I finished the day with a low-light session that did not involve firing. I moved through the lobby, the lane corridor, and the classroom using short bursts from the handheld flashlight, never pointing it toward a reflective surface. I timed myself between positions and wrote the times down. I shut off the generator after exactly 90 minutes and logged the fuel level. Day 12 opened with a radio scan at 6:45. I caught words about overflow and transport, then silence. I ate oats and a canned peach to keep morale from slipping into ruts. I cleaned the office window inside the shutter because a clean pane helps the eye track movement through the security film. I ran the fans on low for 20 minutes to move the air and then shut them off to conserve power. At 8:40, a pair of men walked along the fence. They did not try the gate. One held a gas can by the handle and stared at the shutter for 3 long seconds. I stayed back, rifle ready but down, and watched them on the camera. They talked to each other but not to me. After a minute, they moved on toward the creek trail. I wrote a line for each in the log with a short description, direction of travel, and the time. At 10 o'clock, I did a quiet cleaning day. I scrubbed the bathroom floors with a bleach solution, sealed the used rags in a contractor bag, and placed the bag in the outside bin near the ditch for a night move. I pulled every flashlight and checked batteries. I re-lubed 2 pistols and a 12-gauge lightly because dust had settled on the counters over the past day despite the shutters. I disassembled 1 carrier unit from lane 7 that had been slow the previous week, cleaned the track, re-greased the bearing surfaces with a thin film, and reassembled it. I then wrote down round counts in the ready magazines and set them in the correct drawers. I do not let ammunition wander. The afternoon brought the first minor test of the noise line. At 3:40, the cans knocked once. The camera showed 2 infected men drifting past the gate, not focused on it but close enough to bump the car curve. Their faces lacked expression. Their hands hung low. They did not respond to my voice when I told them to move on through the intercom. I did not fire. They drifted along the fence and eventually turned toward the creek. I noted the time and the number. I then tightened the cans and added a second line at shin height inside the first in case someone tried to step over the primary run. I ate a small dinner of meal pouches with rice, washed the spoon, and sat in darkness for 20 minutes to listen to the roof and the outer walls. The generator stayed off until evening. I ran it for 90 minutes. topped the internal battery packs, and then shut it down. The phone carried only spotty signal. Messages hung. The browser showed headlines without loading bodies. I turned it off and slept on the cot after one last camera check. Day 13 began at 6:10 with coffee and a short dry fire block. I then moved to lane 5 and fired 2 slow rounds of 223 through the firing port I had cut in the lane wall the previous month during a renovation. The port was angled and backed by steel, so fail angles stayed safe. I did not fire to practice aim as much as to confirm the feel after 2 days of dry work. The shots cracked in the lane and died fast in the soundproof. I cleaned up the brass and bagged it. The firing carried a risk of sound carry through the roof, so I went to the front lot camera to scan for any sign of infected drawn by echoes. Nothing moved. I logged the 2 rounds as necessary training, not stress shooting. Words matter on paper later. At 9 o'clock, a man approached the gate on foot and waved both hands at the camera. He was clean and carried a small backpack. I kept the chain on and spoke through the gap. He said his car broke down on the feeder and he needed water and directions. I told him I could pass a case and a simple map through the gate, but that I would not open the door. He accepted that without pushing. I slid a case of water, 2 canned goods, and a printed sheet under the lower gap, along with a tire plug kit and a small compressor I could spare. He thanked me and said, in a voice that did not have anger in it, that he hoped I stayed safe. He left toward the feeder and did not turn around. I watched him until he cleared the east camera. I wrote his description in the log and the supplies I had passed so I would not forget the count. By afternoon, the sky had that bright, hard quality that gives harsh shadows. I used the light to check the fence ties again and replaced 3. I also added a plywood shield on the inside of the gate within the pallet curve with a narrow mailbox-style slit at chest height. The slit allowed me to pass small things through without exposing my hands to grabbing distance. The shield bolted through the fence fabric into a frame I had set the week prior. I tested the reach, hands safe, tools safe. I returned inside and ate peanut butter on crackers and wrote out the next day plan. Weapons clean rotation, range scrub, generator fuel check, water rotation, quiet day. The noise line woke me at 4:30 in the morning on day 14. I moved from cot to camera in 2 steps. No lights. The cans were swinging. 3 infected gathered at the pallet curve, dead-eyed and bumping into each other. I watched for 2 minutes to confirm no human threat was mixed in, then used the intercom with 1 short blast to break their attention. It did not do much. I waited. After another 5 minutes, they drifted away toward the ditch. I tightened the noise line and wrote down, "Do not speak through intercom unless necessary," because it carried farther than I wanted at that hour. I did not go back to sleep. I made coffee and counted ammunition by caliber with fresh numbers. I pulled 1 case of 223 out of the vault and stacked it deeper behind steel, so casual eyes would not read stock levels through any gap. I used the quiet morning to clean 3 rental pistols I had not touched since closing. I stored them with light oil and locked them in the far side of the vault behind long gun racks. I checked the classroom for anything left by late students and found a small notebook with a child's name on the inside cover. I placed it in the lost and found bin in the office with a date. A small act like that helps keep the room in the brain that stores regular life from collapsing. At noon, a radio voice cut through with a clear tone for the first time in 2 days. The message was calm but thin. The words were about clinics redirecting patients to larger hospitals and about police resources being focused on maintaining order at grocery stores and pharmacies. There was a line about citizens remaining calm and staying home. I wrote the lines down exactly. I know words like that appear when leadership wants calm more than accuracy. I then shut off the scanner to avoid chasing static. The afternoon brought a man in a pickup who stopped near the east corner and got out. He wore a jacket that did not match the heat of the day. He walked to the gate and stared at the sign. I did not approach. He pulled at the chain once and then twice. The cans knocked. He stood still for a long count and then left. I recorded the plate as best as the angle allowed. I added a notation that he pulled rather than pushed. Pullers often return with tools. Day 15 settled back into a routine until 3:10, when a family of 4 cut into the lot with a tire flapping. The car stopped at the gate, and the father stumbled out with panic written in every motion. I grabbed the go bag I keep by the door with water, a repair kit, and printed directions. I approached the gate with chain and lock in place and spoke through the shield slit. I told him I could pass him a plug kit, a compressor, and instruction, but that I would not open the gate. He begged to park inside the loop. I shook my head and kept my voice firm but even. I told him to move the car against the curb to the right, away from the pallet curve, because the infected tend to bump into corners, and he did not want to be in a blind spot. He followed directions without arguing. I passed the kit and a one-page instruction through the slit, and then offered to talk him through the steps. I did so in short sentences. Jack in place, plug the nail hole, cut the excess, inflate to the correct pressure using the compressor. I stood at the slit and watched the lot for any approaching infected while he worked. The mother did not yell. The kids did not cry. When the tire held air, I told him to drive slow to the feeder and keep going. He looked at me and said he would pay me back. I told him to do the same for someone else and to keep his doors locked if anyone flagged him down with a dramatic story. He nodded, got in the car, and drove away at a steady speed. I recorded the time and the supplies used, and then replaced the plug kit from a second one in my parts bin. I do not leave gaps in inventory. The cans knocked again just before dusk. 3 infected approached, drawn by the activity. I stayed quiet, stayed low, and let them wander. One pressed a hand to the shutter and left a smear. I marked the spot with painter's tape on the inside, so I would remember to bleach it in the morning during daylight. I slept light that night, but the noise line stayed quiet until morning. Day 16 decided whether the gate would hold under real pressure. It started with the sound of a pickup at 11:20. The pickup stopped short of the curve. 2 men got out. One carried a bolt cutter, the other carried a sledge. A third stayed in the cab. I watched them on camera as they looked the curve over and talked. Their motions had purpose. I moved to the prepared firing position inside behind the bench with the 223 and the 12 gauge within reach. I used the intercom once. I said, in a voice trimmed of anything extra, that the property was closed, the place was not a shelter, and that they needed to leave. They ignored the message. The man with the cutter tugged at the first chain. The cans rattled. He tried the links near the post. He picked the wrong chain, the decoy I had set across a useless stretch. He worked a while and then moved to the second chain and started in earnest. The man with the sledge tested the pallet curve with a few taps. The third man in the cab moved the truck closer. I did not fire a warning shot into the air because that is noise without purpose. I used the window I had cut behind the steel plate and put a 12-gauge slug into the asphalt 2 feet in front of the sledge to send concrete chips into his shins and to show that I had the angle measured. He jumped back and swore at the gate. He lifted the sledge and hit the pallet. I switched to the rifle and put a clean shot through the tire of the pickup, then immediately shifted to the bench down angle and put a round through the rear quarter panel so the driver could not pin the truck into the curve cleanly. The driver gunned the engine anyway and twisted the frame into the pallet, but the curve held and the truck settled at a bad angle. The man with the cutter turned to run and slammed his shin into a pallet edge. He fell and howled. The sledgeman pulled him back toward the truck. I did not fire again. I held, watched for a firearm, and spoke once more through the intercom stating that medical help would not be given and that they needed to leave before the infected arrived. The driver reversed, the flat tire flopped, and the truck limped out to the road. I logged the rounds, the actions, and the license plate partial. Then I moved the jersey barrier I had staged in the side lot and set it with the truck to reinforce the curve hard. I added a second chain through a different set of posts so cutters would waste time on the wrong line first. I marked the new chain path on my internal diagram in the log. The action drew 3 infected within 20 minutes. They sniffed the curve, bumped the pallets, and then drifted toward the ditch as the interest faded. I did not engage. I waited until dark and then tightened the noise line and topped the barrier with a second row of cans. I ate a cold meal pouch to avoid cooking smell and slept in the office with the headset on one ear so I could hear the camera motion chirp without waking the neighborhood. Day 17 marked the change in the grid. The power flickered at 8:10 in the morning, stabilized for 20 minutes, and then cut. The building shifted to silence in a way I know too well from past storms. I let 10 minutes pass before starting the generator. People listen for generator starts when the city goes quiet. I ran the generator only long enough to top the battery systems and the camera rack, and then shut it down. I switched the refrigerator to a lower duty cycle and wrote down the new runtime plan. 1 hour morning, 1 hour evening for 2 days, then reevaluate based on fuel readings. I walked to the bathroom and opened the tap. The water pressure was low and then steadied weakly. I filled 2 extra jugs and wrote a note that the city water could fail next. I pulled the 5-gallon jugs I had stored in the classroom into a more accessible stack and checked each cap. I laid out 2 additional bleach bottles. I wrote a new rule on the pad, 2 gallons per day hard cap, and an optional half-gallon on high sweat days only. I took the quiet day to scrub the floor of the classroom and to consolidate packaging waste into a contractor bag for a future dump run. I secured the bag in the outside bin behind the shed and locked the bin. I then moved to the roof for a check. The tar seam I had noted on day 9 looked stable after my last patch. I added weight to the hatch and painted a line on the edge so any shift would show on camera. On the way down, I carried 2 more steel plates from the attic storage to the counter brackets and seated them. I kept the interior lights off for the rest of the day and moved by habit and low light. By late afternoon, the water dropped to a trickle and then stopped. I wrote the time in the log. I opened the emergency valve on the classroom water heater and drained several gallons into a clean bin because most people forget that a water heater is a reservoir. I closed it and labeled the bin with bright tape and the date. I then moved the cooking setup to a spot near the classroom window so I could vent steam and smell discreetly. I ate rice and canned chicken and set aside a small square of chocolate I had been saving for a day when the grid went dark. A small treat when the plan demands discipline helps keep the mind from sliding. I slept with a longer generator run in the evening to catch up on devices and to top the internal battery pack for morning without drawing power at dawn when the street carries sound farther. Day 18 began with a perimeter check and a walk of the fence line, with the 12-gauge loaded with slugs and the tow strap over my shoulder. 3 infected were within view at the far corner. I stayed inside the fence and watched them drift along the ditch. I repaired 2 fence ties that had loosened and added a secondary strand through the middle third. I then checked the pallet curve against the Jersey barrier and tightened the chain. I moved back inside and ran a carbine 0 confirm at 25 yards with 3 rounds, then cleaned the bore and recorded the new 0. I conducted a full inventory count in the vault by caliber and by case, including 9mm, 223, 12-gauge, and 308, and wrote the figures cleanly. I confirmed the generator fuel by dipping with a long wooden stick marked with tape. I estimated 22 days at current conservative runtime, longer if I stretch intervals. I wrote the estimate in the pad and underlined it. Around noon, I heard distant popping that could have been gunfire or transformers. The sky held that washed-out tone that comes after a power cut. The road remained empty aside from a single car that rolled through at mid-speed without stopping. I sat near the camera rack and drafted a 1-page set of instructions I could pass to people at the gate to save time. It covered tire repair, basic water safety, avoiding hospitals, using feeder roads rather than main entrances, and a reminder to keep food odors down if someone had to sleep in a car. I printed 10 copies and stacked them in a plastic folder by the slit. That sheet will save me minutes later when minutes keep doors safe. I finished the day with a low-light drill in the lobby. I moved from the counter to the bench to the lane corridor at a steady pace with the handheld flashlight, using short beams and covering angles without sweeping the light across the glass. I set the flashlight beside the cot with the head pointed at the floor and slept with the headset back on one ear. Day 19 formed around quiet jobs that build a wall against careless mistakes. I relabeled every food container in the classroom with larger writing and added the day's date on the open items. I sealed flour in smaller bags within buckets with absorbers so a single rip would not waste 10 pounds. I pulled the spices into a small bin near the stove because proper seasoning keeps a person eating even when appetite drops. I decanted cooking oil into smaller bottles to reduce the mess of spills. I updated the battery schedule for flashlights and headlamps and rotated cells. I wiped down the rifle with a lightly oiled cloth and checked optic screws with a torque driver by feel, because over-tightening is its own failure. The mid-afternoon brought a new sound. Not the cans, not voices. A low scrape on sheet metal from the far side of the building where the service alley runs. I moved to the camera and saw a single infected man testing the rear door with a shoulder. He did not back up between hits. Each impact landed on the crossbar I had set. I let him tire himself until the hits slowed. When he drifted along the wall, I stepped to the prepared firing port in the lane that covers that alley and waited. He stopped and stared at the wall. I did not shoot. 10 minutes later, he moved off toward the ditch. I noted the time and the motion pattern. I wrote a line in the pad to recheck the rear door bolts at dawn. I cooked rice with a small piece of canned sausage, wiped the pot, and used a single paper towel for the final dry. I placed the used towel in the sealed trash bin to control smell. I ran the generator for 50 minutes, cut it, and sat in the dark for 15 minutes to let ears adjust. I scanned the cameras and focused on the edges rather than the center, because movement at the edges is what you miss if you stare at the obvious. Nothing significant. I slept after writing a line. Power gone day 17, water gone same day, fuel sufficient if disciplined, gate holding. Day 20 began with movement on the feeder road toward the east. A vehicle convoy of 3 cars crawled past at 7:10, stopped near the old big box store, and turned into the lot on flat tires. People got out, looked around, and then got back in and kept rolling on the rims. The sound carried. 2 infected drifted toward the noise but did not catch up. I stayed off the radio and off the phone. I used the time to detail clean 1 lane, including sweeping brass, mopping the floor with a light bleach solution, checking the carrier belt for fraying, and confirming the backstop surface integrity. I want the lane serviceable in case I need live fire training again, or to zero a replacement optic. I then reorganized the office shelves so that the items I use daily were reachable without a step stool. Fatigue makes standing on chairs a bad bet. At 10:30, the noise line triggered with a quick rattle. I moved to the slit and saw a teenage boy standing at the gate with a backpack and a bicycle. He asked if I had a pump he could borrow and a small bottle of water. I told him I could pass both through the slit, but that I would not open the gate. He nodded without arguing. I handed the pump and a 1-liter bottle and a printed sheet with a route that cut behind the school toward the river bridge, where another water spigot should still flow for a time. He asked if the rumors about people not staying down were true. I said he should avoid contact and never approach a person acting strangely. He said he understood. He handed the pump back when the tire held air, thanked me, and rode away at a steady pace without showing off. I wrote the time, description, and supplies in the log. The rest of the day held steady aside from the low grind of the generator for an hour at sunset. I looked over the Jersey barrier and pallet curve under the last light and saw no fresh tool marks. I added 1 more chain loop to the far post to complicate cutters. I hauled the sealed trash bag to the far bin near the ditch for a night move when the air hides small sounds, and then went back inside and locked the side door. I ended the day with a quiet check of the rifle and the shotgun ready positions and wiped the counters. I slept after writing the day summary. Doors secure, fuel plan on schedule, water ration holding, contacts minimal and controlled. Infected counts near the fence between 3 and 6 at any one time. Behavior non-responsive to voice, slow drift pattern. Day 21 started at 6:15 with a scan of the cameras and a slow walk from door to door without turning on the overhead lights. The interior felt tight and familiar. I brewed coffee on the camp stove, measured the water carefully, and added a small spoon of condensed milk because numbers on the page do not matter if the mind drifts. I ate oats with peanut butter, opened the pad, and listed tasks. Recheck rear door bolts, bleach the shutter smears I marked with painter's tape, clean lane 5 glass, verify suppressor inventory, stage subsonic 9mm. The grid was down, the water was off, and the phones only worked in short bursts. The plan adjusted to that reality. I unlocked the side door with the chain still on and stepped into the gap to smell the morning. No traffic. A faint char odor from somewhere south. The pallet curve stood where I left it. The cans rested still on their paracord, and the Jersey barrier showed no new scrapes. I locked the bar back in place, slid the extra hasp, and returned inside to bleach the marked shutter spots. I mixed a fresh bottle at the ratio written on the sticky note, sprayed the areas, waited, and wiped with a rag that went straight into the sealed trash bin. Surfaces clean, hands washed, log updated. By 8:20, I opened the vault and checked the demo suppressors I keep under lock for manufacturer days and advanced classes. I own them legally and keep the paperwork in a folder in the safe. I mounted one on a 9mm pistol and one on a 9mm carbine I keep for loaners. I pulled 2 small boxes of subsonic 9mm from the shelf and labeled each magazine clearly. I placed both setups in a drawer marked with tape and set the drawer within arm's reach of the bench that covers the firing ports. A suppressed 223 is still sharp. A suppressed 9mm with subsonic loads can be managed indoors without painting the whole block with sound. The goal was precision, not spectacle. At 10:05, the noise line clinked softly. I checked the front camera and saw 2 infected drift along the gate, touch the pallet, and sway away. I stayed still and let them pass. At noon, a helicopter crossed high over the freeway. Civilian paint with no tail numbers I could read at that angle. It moved west without changing speed. Later, a pair of fast movers cut a line across the sky and were gone before the sound reached me. Distant pops came from the south, irregular and without rhythm. I made no calls. I listened and wrote one line: aircraft active. The day ended with 90 minutes of generator time, a water rotation, and a quiet dry fire block at the clearing barrel. Day 22 set its tone at 11:40. A pair of trucks rolled up without plates. 4 men got out. 2 walked the fence with that quick glance pattern that says the mind is counting distances. 1 tested the chain with 2 fingers like he was checking the bite. I moved to the prepared position behind the bench, kept the rifle on the rest and the suppressed 9mm carbine within reach, and watched without announcing myself. The smallest man pointed at the Jersey barrier and then at the pallet curve, then traced the curve with his boot. He misread the load path. The driver stayed near the truck door, with a hand low where a pistol could live, though I did not see one. I used the intercom once, voice flat. No open threats. I said the property was closed, the building was occupied, police traffic was heavy nearby, and any attempt to force entry would end badly. The man at the chain pretended not to hear and tried the link again with a small tug. The driver said something I could not hear and made a motion toward the pallet. I waited. The 2 at the fence kited a length of strap from the bed. My bench was already angled, my firing angles already measured. I put the rifle on safe and shifted to the 9mm carbine because I did not want the sharp crack of a rifle. I rested my arms and took a clean headshot through the firing port at the strap where the hook would land, timed to the man's reach. The shot cut the hook free and buried in the pallet wood. The men jumped like someone dropped a tool behind them. I spoke again, longer this time. I told them there would be no warning shots. I would not negotiate, and any damage to my gate would be a waste of their time. The driver stood up straight, looked into the lens as if he knew where it was, and seemed to weigh his choices. He said something to his crew and tilted his head to the truck. They backed off, loaded the strap, and rolled out slow. I held position for 5 minutes, then reset the cans on the paracord and added a second strap around the barrier to keep it from knocking when someone got clever. A small leaf of paper held where the headshot cut the strap. I left it there as a marker for wind and to remind me of the exact angle in case I needed to repeat it. In the afternoon, I ran a quiet lane session with the suppressed 9mm carbine against paper at 15 yards to confirm point of impact. The carbine fed subsonic rounds smoothly. I marked the holes and wrote a short note on holdovers at 25. I cleaned and re-oiled the weapon and returned it to the drawer. A cluster of infected moved along the fence as evening fell. I did not shoot. They drifted away after 20 minutes. I shut down the generator at the mark and slept. On day 23, the sky kept a grey tone that lingered all morning. Helicopters crossed the corridor twice. Both were painted in civilian colors with doors shut. In the early afternoon, a single aircraft with a military profile moved high, then turned east. A rolling thud arrived minutes later from somewhere far off, not sharp like a rifle but a broad impact. I stepped to the cameras and checked the fence lines. No new activity. I spent the morning retorquing the screws on the counterplates and rechecking the optic mounts on the rifle and the loaner shotgun. I rewrote the 2-gallon water rule in larger letters and taped it at eye level above the classroom sink. I pulled a pair of old shop towels from the rag bin, cut them into squares, and sewed simple tags on one corner so I would not mix clean with dirty when the day ran long. At 3 o'clock, a man with a backpack stopped at the gate and peered through. He waved in a quick, nervous way and asked for directions to the river bridge. His voice carried a clean edge, not the dragging tone I was learning to spot. I kept the chain on and spoke through the slit. I offered a printed map, a small bottle of water, and a tip to cut behind the school to avoid the cluster of infected that liked to gather near the pharmacy when people got careless with noise. He thanked me and left without pushing for more. I logged the interaction and restocked the handout folder. The day closed with a slow inventory check, a change of batteries in the flashlights, and rice with canned fruit to balance salt and sugar in a way that keeps sleep straight. Day 24 began with the smell of a burned building riding in light air from the southwest. I walked the fence line from inside and watched the ditch. 3 infected stood in the field across the road and faced nothing. I bled off the classroom water heater into a bin for the day's use and sealed the valve. I set the generator schedule to 60 minutes morning and 60 minutes evening to stretch diesel. I wiped the floors in the lobby and lane corridor with a light bleach solution, then aired the rooms with the side door open and the chain tight. I kept my carbine on the sling and my eyes on the pallets while the air moved. Clean floors keep small cuts from turning into infections. Late afternoon carried a small surge of pedestrians. 2 men walked past with rifles slung and eyes forward. One wore a badge on a lanyard that meant little now. They did not look at the gate. A small group of 3 adults and 1 child moved along the far sidewalk with grocery sacks that did not hold shape. They were quiet. A single infected followed them at a distance. I did not break my rule. I did not open the gate. The group turned at the corner and vanished down the feeder. The infected kept walking until it found the fence and bumped it with no plan. I stayed inside and let time do most of the work. At 7:20, I did a planned, short, suppressed shot at a steel silhouette inside lane 5 to confirm the 9mm carbine did not shift point of impact after yesterday's cleaning. The group printed where it should. I cleared the weapon, stored it, and shut the lane lights. I slept with the headset on one ear and the flashlight on the floor pointing at the wall so the first click would not announce anything through the front glass. Day 25 moved in jumps. It started calm. By noon the cans rattled twice in 10 minutes. The camera showed 8 infected gathered near the pallet curve, faces slack, arms hanging. One lifted its head and bumped the wood. I pulled the suppressed carbine, loaded subsonics, and moved to the firing port that gave me a clean angle with a backstop. Headshots only. I took a breath, waited for the closest one to settle, and fired. It dropped without drama. I waited again, and fired at the next. The report stayed contained in the lane, a low mechanical cough rather than a crack. I kept the pace measured so I would not invite echoes. 4 shots, 4 bodies down. 2 drifted back at the sound of their falls. I waited. They moved into the angle and I took 2 more. The last pair lingered near the ditch. I held. After a long minute they turned away. I did not chase them with bullets. Shooting draws interest. 2 hours later the count around the fence doubled. A cluster of 12 to 15 wandered near the gate, the alley, and the field across the road. I kept the generator off. I kept the lights off. I stayed behind the bench, used the camera zoom sparingly, and focused on the heads when the angle lined up. I rotated between firing ports so the impact signature did not repeat from the same corner. I worked in pairs and singles. When no clean angle appeared, I waited. By sunset, the number had fallen. The bodies near the gate created a problem. I could not leave them to rot near the pallet curve. Smell brings trouble. I set the pole and the tow strap, waited 30 minutes to make sure the field stayed quiet, and then moved through the side door to drag bodies down the slope and into the ditch. I kept gloves on, sprayed the pole with bleach on return, and wiped the door handles. It took an hour and cost me a pair of gloves. I logged it and drank water slowly to avoid cramps. I did a longer security walk inside after dark. I checked the hinges on the side door, the anchor bolts on the rear door, and the screws on the counter plates. I loaded 6 more subsonic magazines and set them in the drawer with fresh tape. I wrote a line in the pad. Sound management worked. Suppressed 9mm effective for headshots at these distances. Avoid strings longer than 3 in a row. Rotate firing positions. I added that the ditch could carry water in a storm and bodies must not block the culvert. I made a note to drag anything that risked blocking flow farther down the bank tomorrow. Day 26 brought a different problem. At 9:30, a pair of men approached from the east on foot with backpacks and a cooler. They stopped 15 yards from the gate and studied the barrier like students on a test. One called out with a polite tone that carried a strange calm. He said he was looking for a place to trade ammunition for food, and that he only wanted to talk. His voice had rehearsed confidence in it. I kept the chain on, and answered through the slit that I was not trading, and that I could pass a small amount of water if they needed it. He smiled without warmth and said that he suspected I had stock tucked away, and that we could make a fair exchange if I opened the gate just enough for him to step in. I told him no. He asked me if I was alone. I did not answer. He glanced at his partner, and then looked past the pallet curve at the roofline. I watched his hands. He kept them open until he did not. His right hand slid toward his pocket. I closed the slit and stepped back to the bench. The man laughed in a way that did not fit the scene and said, louder, that he would come back with friends and that the city was past rules. I marked his face on the camera and watched them leave, then watched the road for a full hour before stepping away. The afternoon held a steady drift of infected toward the ditch, drawn by movement and maybe by the trace smell of bleach on the curb. I kept the suppressed carbine within reach but did not rush shots. 1 at a time when the angle was clean, 2 at a time when the alley offered a backstop. I dragged 3 bodies late, using the tow strap through the fence and working from inside to avoid hands grabbing. It was slow, and left marks on the strap that I wiped and dried. I ended the day with a note to evaluate building a hooked tool with more reach and to set a dedicated bleach bucket for outside work, so I would not carry trace fluids back onto the lobby floor. On day 27, close to noon, 2 helicopters moved low and slow over the freeway and banked south. The noise pulled infected from the field and the ditch toward the road. The cars on the shoulder had settled into a row of dead weight. An hour later, a series of deep impacts rolled in from the west. I felt the roof vibration through the ladder when I went up to check the hatch weight. No visible damage, but I added more weight and painted another mark so camera shift would show change. I went back down and checked the shutter track. Fine grit had settled in the corner from the earlier bodies, and the dust blown off the road. I cleaned it, greased the visible hinge points with a small squeeze, and wiped any excess. By late afternoon, a line of infected stacked along the fence near the east corner. They pressed without plan and hit the chain link with shoulders and forearms. I kept to my rule about noise and used the suppressed carbine in a slow rhythm from the port. Headshots only. Pause, watch, and repeat. I drank water in measured sips to avoid a jitter's edge. The line thinned. A man in a torn jacket stopped short of the fence and stared at the sign with a blank face. He looked like a person but moved with that lag I have learned to read. I waited until he moved into the angle, then took the shot. He dropped straight. I dragged him later with the strap. The ditch held more than I liked. I noted that I needed to start a field line beyond the culvert to keep water clear if the sky opened. Near dark, the generator coughed once and steadied. I checked the cage and verified the fuel line and filter were clean. I wrote the runtime down and added a line to swap filters on a rotation rather than waiting for symptoms. I laid out 2 spares on a labeled shelf and taped the change date to each. I slept light and kept the headset on. Day 28 tested the barrier at 3:10 in the morning. A truck rolled in with lights off and crept toward the curve. 4 men got out. 2 pulled a heavy strap, and the other 2 carried a short ladder and a pry bar. I woke at the first camera chirp, moved to the bench, and watched through the monochrome view. The driver put the truck into position, and the pair with the strap worked it low, trying to snake the hook around the far post beneath the pallets. I let them struggle because effort slows aggressive choices. When the hook seated, the driver eased out on the strap. The pallet shifted 3 inches and then bound against the barrier. The man with the pry bar stepped in to lever the corner. I used the port and took a suppressed shot through the pry bar just above his grip. The bar skittered away. The man shouted and grabbed his hand. The driver gunned the engine and the strap went tight. I put 2 rifle rounds into the radiator and the front tire in one smooth pair, knowing the sound would carry but also knowing a disabled truck is easier to live with than a rolling battering ram. The engine hissed, the front end sagged, and the driver stumbled out cursing the machine. I spoke through the intercom in a voice that was steady enough for a recording. I told them to leave the truck, leave the lot, and not return. I informed them that police were patrolling the next block. That part was not true, but people fill blanks when it helps them survive the next 10 minutes. The men hesitated. One scanned the roofline. Another kicked the strap with a small, angry motion. Then they pulled the strap, left the ladder, and walked out. I watched with the camera until they cleared the east corner and turned north. I waited 30 minutes before I moved, then eased out with gloves and dragged the ladder inside the fence for parts. I cut the strap into pieces and kept the hooks. Hooks are useful. I took a slow lap around the interior, reset the cans, and set 2 more cans on the barrier top. I logged the shots, the actions, and the new ladder inventory. Shooting at night pulled infected from the field. By dawn, the fence had another ring. I shifted to the suppressed carbine, moved between firing ports, and took headshots in a methodical way. I changed magazines only after checking angles to avoid misses while reloading. By mid-morning, the fence was clear again. I did the drag work with the pole and strap as before, bleached the pole, and washed my hands 4 times across 10 minutes. I threw the gloves into the trash bin and sealed it tight. I wrote a line in the pad to build a longer hook and to pre-stage 2 more pairs of gloves in the outdoor locker so I would not walk back and forth mid-task. Day 29 arrived with a quiet sky and a junkyard smell from the freeway. I made coffee, ate oats with a small spoon of jam for a change in taste, and started a full inventory day. I counted ammunition by caliber and wrote the numbers in the pad with room for subtraction lines. I counted water by cases and by gallons. I checked diesel by dipstick and marked the stick with fresh tape. I counted propane bottles for the camp stove and wrote a note that I had 32 days at current consumption if I kept the stove usage tight and avoided long boils. I checked medical supplies and made a list of what I would want to have more of if the chance appeared. Gauze, tape, antibiotic ointment, more bleach. I sorted food by expiration and pulled older cans forward. I opened the safe and reviewed documents in a way that keeps the mind grounded. Business papers, permits, suppressor paperwork, bills that no longer matter, the sale contract from the previous owners. I read the signed page and moved on. I closed the safe with a steady hand and logged the time. In the afternoon, I did lane maintenance with new energy. I wiped dust, inspected the carriers, pumped the target winches, and then shut the lane lights. I ran a low-light walk with the handheld again. The sweep times matched the numbers from last week. Body remembers lines. I made tea and sat on the stool with the door cracked to vent steam and smell. The street carried a single distant siren and then silence. I closed the door, locked the bar, and checked the generator cage. Fine, no leaks. I wrote a new rule under the list on the office door. No rifle shots unless a vehicle threat presents. Suppress 9mm for infected at the fence and for precise engagements. Rotate ports. Do not build habits that an observer could map. The last day of the month, day 30, held clear air and an early sun. I scanned the cameras at 6:20. Front lot empty. Rear gate calm. Side alley quiet. The ditch showed water at a thin trickle from a lawn runoff upstream. I moved to the stove to heat water and the burner sputtered. The flame declined to a weak blue line and went out. I checked another burner. Same pattern. I turned off the valves and stared at the wall for a count because the mind likes to pretend a problem solves itself when ignored. I opened the propane locker and confirmed the bottles were fine. The issue was not my small supply. It was the city gas line that still fed the water heater pilot and my backup stove connection. The pressure had bled low 2 nights running. Now it was gone. I wrote the time and the note. City gas out by day 30. I set the camp stove back on the table, attached a fresh bottle, and cooked oats without feeling any rush. The plan already covered this. I stepped to the gate with the chain on and pulled the slit open to feel the air. A single infected stood across the road near the fence line, facing nothing. I closed the slit and returned to the bench. No need to shoot if it does not threaten. 10 minutes later, a pair of people moved down the sidewalk, saw the infected, and crossed the street to give it room. They did not look at my sign. They moved with that tired precision new survivors learn in the first week. I let them pass without a word and marked the time and direction. Midday brought 2 helicopters again, both southbound, one lower than I liked. A military jet crossed high and fast. A delay, then a low roll of impacts from the west. The ditch carried a wider trickle from runoff somewhere upstream. I walked the interior to check for seep and saw none. I pulled on gloves and dragged 2 bodies farther down the bank so water would not pool against them. I tied a small yellow flag to a rebar stake near the culvert to remind myself to keep the flow clear. I returned inside, cleaned the pole, and logged the work. Near 3 o'clock, a man approached the gate and stood just outside the angle of the camera as if he knew where the lens was and wanted to test my patience. He called out in a civil tone that he needed ammunition and would pay in cash or fuel. I told him I was not selling. He asked if I had family inside. I did not answer. He said he had heard I was alone. I said nothing. He kept talking for a long minute, trying different angles, making polite comments that never quite stepped into open threat, but walked in that direction. I repeated that the shop was closed and that he needed to move along. He finally stepped into the camera's view and met the lens like he had a point to make. I watched his hands. Open, empty. He nodded to himself and left. I watched him in the mirror on the far post as he checked his hair like he was going to a meeting. He was not a wanderer. He was a scout for a later problem. I wrote it down exactly that way. As evening approached, infected built around the fence again, almost as if the day had set a new habit in them. I used the suppressed carbine from the ports and took headshots with patience. I kept my breathing even and my pace steady and paused longer between shots to shave the sound footprint. I rotated to the second port and worked the angle on the alley. When the angles did not line up, I waited. I did not fire misses into chain link or wood. By dusk, the fence was clear again. I dragged bodies slowly, managed the ditch line, and sealed the gloves in the trash bin. I wiped the floor inside the door where my boots marked. I ate rice and fruit. I ran the generator for an hour and cut it dead on the line. I wrote the last page for the month with clean numbers. 9mm subsonic used to conserve attention. 223 used only on vehicles or metal problems. 12 gauge kept loaded with slugs for last-ditch work at the door. Diesel at a level that matches 2 weeks of current schedule. Water holding on rotation. Food sufficient for another month at present rate, with a margin if I cut coffee to every 3rd day. I sat at the stool in the quiet lobby and looked at the laminated map with the 3 routes marked in green and the 3 red circles over the hospital, the police headquarters, and the big box cluster that never emptied without trouble. I traced the farm road west with a finger and considered leaving. The thought crossed the mind like an item on a list. I did not grab it. The range is built like a box with sharp corners, and habits I know by touch. I am set up here with rules I can follow without thinking. I help through gaps. I do not let anyone in. I do not waste noise. I write everything down. Those rules kept me alive for 30 days inside a city that lost electricity on day 17 and water the same day. Gas failed today. The helicopters still fly. The jets still cross the sky. The roads hold more dead cars than moving ones. The ditch carries what it can. The gate holds. The barrier holds. The mind holds if the hands keep working. Before sleep, I did a last walk under flashlight. Short bursts and long pauses. I checked the benchmarks on the floor, the taped labels on drawers, the serial number on the gifted pistol entry for Denny to remind myself I did right by him, and the suppressor paperwork tab in the safe. The paper is not for show. It is for the moment after the mess when someone asks what was lawful and what was memory. I closed the safe and put the key in the same mug I always use. I set my belt on the chair so I can hook one finger and lift the holster clean. I placed the flashlight on the floor with the lens aimed at the baseboard. I set the headset on my right ear. I wrote the first line for the next page. Month 2, stretch fuel, tighten water, hold the line. Then I turned off the lamp and let the building settle into its new normal. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the stories alive. For now, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and stay alive. Jack's Nightmares, signing off. Until next time, survivor.